Hello. Great to be back with you as we're entering now into the last chapter of Ephesians. Today we're looking at Ephesians chapter 6 verses 1 to 9. And last week, whilst we looked at the body of marriage in the talk that last week, this week we stick within the household or within the normal everyday lives by looking at the family and the workplace. Those are the two focuses of this week's work. And again, I want to reiterate, just like I did last week, never take verses out of context. Don't just look at a singular one, look at a group, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. So this is Ephesians 6 verses 1 to 9. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and you may enjoy long life on the earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not people, because you know that the Lord will reward each one of you for whatever good they do, whether they are slave or free. And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. So, there we go. Again, we're going to take these as clumps, all right? It's really important to do that. And the first clump we're going to look at is verses 1 to 4, family, parents and children. Now, being honest with you, I'm very aware whenever I talk on something like that I don't have children. I'm always very aware that I don't have children. I am not a parent. And I really want all parents that are here, I think you do an amazing job. I'm in awe, of what you do to serve your children and your families. So please hear me. I'm not going to be able to speak from personal experience as a parent here, and I don't aim to know what that feeling feels like. All I aim to do is to unpack what does the scriptures tell us about this. That's all I have to go on. But I do have experience of being a child, so I'm able to talk about that. When talking to children here, Paul sticks with the Ten Commandments version of honoring your father and your mother. Now remember, in this context, these verses are also assuming that this is a Christian household. It's been written to Christians. So this is assuming that the parents are both Christians as well. Now, that doesn't mean if your parents aren't Christians, you shouldn't honor your father and mother. I am not saying that. My parents aren't Christians, and I do all I can to honor them. But there's also some decisions that I make in my life that they don't understand because they don't understand my relationship with Jesus. This is hard sometimes when I'm trying to explain to them why I'm in the career that I am, why I've got to make the life choices I am. That's sometimes really hard to explain. But, so what I do is I live my life to honor Christ first. And I'm a pastor here. I'm following the call of him on my life. But similarly, I do all that I can within honoring Christ to honor my parents. And I try to lead them through my decisions with honor, even the decisions that they don't understand. But the assumption here, though, as I say, is that the parents of the children are Christians and these parents are living in line with God's word. And in doing so, we as children need to honor them as our human parents. And how do we do it? How do we do that? Well, again, like last week, I want to look at the Message translation of these verses that Eugene Peterson worked on, which again, I think helps shed a bit more light on it. It says, children, do what your parents tell you. This is only right. Honor your father and mother is the first commandment that has a promise attached to it, namely, so you will live well and have a long life. Fathers, do not frustrate your children with no-win scenarios. Take them by the hand and lead them in the way of the master. So, what does honoring your father and mother look like? Do what your parents tell you is a way to honor them. Now, this is making the assumption that what your parents are telling you to do is in line with the way of God's loving and living. I love the reminder, the promise that if we do this, we will live well and have a long life. Honouring our parents in line with God leads us to living well and having a long life. God is true to his promises. What's one of the things that causes us to lose good health, to lose our health? Anxiety does. Worry does. Personal strife. They cause us to lose our good health. And what kind of strife often causes people the most pain in their personal lives? It's been noted that it's when you have personal strife in your family life. That can cause you the most pain, which can lead you to the most anxiety, which can lead you to the most worry. So when we live in a way that does honour our parents, it does lead to better mental health, because if we don't honour our parents, we get a lot more strife in our family, which can damage our health as well. However, does this mean parents can do what they like and expect anything and everything from their children? No. No, it doesn't. Every relationship is two-sided, even that of a parent and a child. The parent is expected to love in line with God's word for their children. Verse 4 also reminds parents how we need to behave towards our children. The NIV puts it as not exasperating our children. I like that word. But the message, I like the message one even more. Don't frustrate your children with no-win scenarios. Definitely. And instead, and I love this, how it's put in the message, instead, take them by the hand and lead them in the way of the master. Parents, it's encouraging parents to not just tell their children what to do and walk away. It's actually encouraging parents to take their child in the hand and to walk with them through their issues and their difficulties. To not just say it's my way or the highway and exit, but to walk with them hand in hand towards Jesus. From my personal childhood, looking back as what I was like as a child, I know I probably would have honoured my parents as a child a bit more if they had walked a bit more hand in hand with me. But similarly, they may have walked a bit more hand in hand with me if I'd honoured them more. It's like a symbiotic relationship. Like any relationship, it's two ways. All we can do is the best from our end. So parents, love your children in line with God's word and take them by the hand and walk with them through their issues. And children, follow what your mum and dad tell you. Honour them, respect them, because they love you. Do this together. And then there's verses 5 to 9, which we should take as another clump of verses together. And this often gets quoted singularly. And actually, it's not about that. This is about a balanced view, especially in modern day society, in the workplace. And first of all, it's got to be said that I've seen these verses used to say that Christianity promotes slavery and is okay with slavery. That is not the case. Slavery is not condoned or supported by our faith, and we must make sure people hear that. Paul was not for slavery. In fact, when we look at Paul's writings as a whole, we see that actually he's trying to promote freedom for slaves and equality between people. An example of this is when Paul writes his letters. And in these letters, he writes about Philemon's slave, Onesimus. Now, I don't know what Onesimus did wrong, but Onesimus did something so wrong in Philemon's house. Onesimus the slave ran away from Philemon and he ended up with Paul. Now, Paul writes to Philemon and Paul sends Onesimus back to Philemon. But in Paul's writings to Philemon, he urges Philemon not to greet Onesimus like a slave. He also urges Philemon to not greet Onesimus through the eyes of whatever Philemon had done, whatever Onesimus had done to Philemon, which I don't know what that is. I assume it was pretty bad if it took the slave to run away. Paul urges Philemon to greet Onesimus, who was his slave, not as a slave, but as a brother, to set him free from that slavery position. Paul was writing here and speaking to a culture in which slavery was the norm. And what Paul writes here is incredibly countercultural. And whilst Paul knows he probably won't get slavery outlawed, he can promote Christian values within that system. I mean, look at verse 9. Just looking at verse 9 states Paul's intent so clearly. And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism in him. Saying, masters, don't treat your slaves like slaves. You're all equal under Jesus. So treat them as equal under Jesus. How countercultural is that? He's urging masters in a time where there's masters and slaves as the norm of this hierarchy to urge masters to go, you are not above them, you are equal, and treat them like equals. Paul reminds those that have slaves that they are no better than the slaves. They are all equal under Christ and should be treated accordingly. Completely countercultural to the time, leading masters to treat their slaves as equals, which could, I'm not saying it does, but which could lead to those masters setting their slaves free, or at least them resetting the arrangement so it's much more of an employee nature. Maybe. So when I read these verses, I don't just apply them to masters and slaves. I apply them to like household servants and people that run the household. All a bit Downton Abbey, I know. Or even using modern day parlance to the relationship between a worker and their boss. What do I take away from this? Workers. Work your workplace as if you're serving Christ. And bosses, employers, please know you are not above your workers. You are all equal under Christ, and they should be treated, your employees or workers, as equals. And when we do this, when we live like this at home and we live like this at work, what does it promote? Unity and togetherness. Something Ephesians has been continually striving towards. And that's it for today. So I hope you're well. Stay safe, look after yourselves, look after each other, and I can't wait to speak to you soon.